Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to A Cup of Hope with Hope Against Trafficking and the Michigan Abolitionist Project. Thank you so much for joining us. And for our panel today, you will have the opportunity to submit questions to our panel by typing your questions into the comments section wherever you're watching, whether it's on YouTube or Facebook. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the session. Feel free also to go ahead and add in comments just to let us know that you're here. We appreciate that. Now, today I'd like to welcome today's panelists. First, we have Hannah McPeak, who is the Education Director for Hope Against Trafficking, and we have Emily Johnson, Program Coordinator at Michigan Abolitionist Project. Today's special guest is Dr. Celia Williamson. She has been engaged in anti-trafficking work for over 26 years. She's published numerous articles, books, and reports. She founded the first anti-trafficking program in Ohio in 1993 and directly worked with victims in Toledo for several years. She's completed numerous federally funded studies, and some additional accomplishments include founding the annual International Human Trafficking and Social Justice Conference, founding the Lucas County Human Trafficking Coalition, chairing the Research and Analysis Subcommittee for the Ohio Attorney General's Human Trafficking Commission, and serving as president of the Global Association of Human Trafficking Scholars. She also produces a podcast called Emancipation Nation Podcast and founded a global network of advocates called the Emancipation Nation Network. So thank you, and I will turn it over to our panelists.
Okay, I have to unmute. Can you guys hear me? Yay, so I'm so excited to be here with you beautiful ladies. Dr. Williamson, thank you for joining us today. We're so honored and so excited. I mean, the work that you've done is truly incredible.
Well, thank you.
I wanted to kick off with a quick quote, and I'm gonna read it because I don't wanna mess it up. But Margaret Mead wrote, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And I think that that's really powerful because we got to realize that we all have the power and the ability to do something great, right? And so here we are, the three of us and our audience, sitting and talking about the important issue with regard to the history of women's rights and of the women's rights movement. And so I'm going to just also read another quote because it's so powerful, and you're going to sort of see where we started as women. But it says, "Being allowed to live life in an atmosphere of religious freedom, having a voice in the government you support with your taxes, living free of lifelong enslavement by another person, these beliefs about how life should and must be lived were once considered outlandish by many." And this was written up in an article by the National Women's History Alliance. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like, can you imagine? So this back in like 1848, that living a lifelong, a life of freedom and a life of, voting, a life of being included and counted and having a voice was outlandish. Mm-hmm. And, but it didn't matter to these four specific women back in 1848 who, despite that, met together and had a tea where they started this whole movement of regarding the women's rights. And that meeting of four women launched this. I mean, and now here we are 160, whatever, I can't do my math, 160 years or so later, we are talking about them. We are three women here together talking about these things and then hopefully continuing to engage in the movement and making that difference that we believe that we need to make as women, as daughters, as sisters, as mothers, as friends. So welcome. And I'm excited about this movement starting right here and right now. So back in the day, in 1848, when these women came together, the issues that were brought up, that women, and then the ways in which women were mistreated, is unbelievable. I'm going to read a couple of these because I knew some of these things, but never really thought about it as intensely as I have for this, to be prepared for this episode. But married women were legally dead in the eyes of the law. I mean, and this included the queen. I mean, the wife of the king. I mean, you did not have any rights. Your husband had all of the legal power and responsibility over their wives. I mean, it's like women had no property rights. They were not allowed to vote. They couldn't submit laws. They had to submit to the laws that they couldn't be a part of forming. Women had to pay property rights, although they had no representation in the levying of these taxes. They earned way less or nothing for the work they did compared to what men earned. Women were not allowed to enter certain professions like medicine or law, and they had no means to gain an education. Some of them never had the opportunity, whereas most men did. So those are a lot of the issues that were dealt with in America in the 1800s. And as we've journeyed through time, of course, now, and Emily talked about like the 19th Amendment where women now can vote, and we're married, and we can actually still be alive, considered alive. We can own property. We've grown. Like this movement has impacted so many things in the way that women were mistreated, and now we are valued in a sense, against all of those points that I listed. But now, kind of beginning of the 1990s, 2000s, we're seeing sort of a whole nother host of complex issues. But before we get into that, and I want to discuss these things in more detail, this is one of the reasons why I'm so excited to have Dr. Williamson on here with us. I know that you are, to me, a hero, somebody who has bringing together advocates to continue to fight for freedom and justice. And you created, like it says, like Kendra read in your bio, the Emancipation Nation and your podcast and all the work that you've done. Can you tell us about those things?
Yeah, first it puts me in the mind of, I remember Susan B. Anthony in the 1800s that tried to vote and was actually fined and brought to court and told the judge that she will not pay 1 penny of that unjust debt. And she was, publishing a magazine called The Revolution. And so I know that there were women like us all through history who defied. I think one of the problems that women have is sometimes we are too polite and we are too obedient. And it's our nature to be kind. It's our nature to build relationship. We're all about the relationship. But sometimes we need to speak up, show up, stand up, and not be pleasing all the time. And I think we can do that because we have such a vast array of skills that we can use. And sometimes we put them away because we don't want our light to shine brighter than somebody else's because we're so concerned with relationship. But that can hurt us and hurt the movement in the end. So I think freedom, I built the Emancipation Nation podcast specifically because I had been an anti-trafficking advocate for, over 26 years. And I knew there were lots of people in the communities across the US and around the world that were passionate about human trafficking. And they really had a lot of passion and a lot of commitment, but they didn't have a lot of knowledge and a lot of skill. And so being able to bring experts to the advocates' ears without them having to read a bunch of stuff or going back to school or spending all this time, you could just get very practical knowledge straight to your ears while you're walking, while you're driving. How can we make this revolution as easy as possible? And that's what it is, because a revolution, of course, is not about burning and looting and maybe even marching. It's the revolution begins when you change someone's mind, when you change someone's thought, when you change someone's heart. That's where the revolution begins. So if you quietly come to someone's ears, you can create a tidal wave of people who are already passionate. They already want to make a difference. They just need the skills and the knowledge and the path to go down, and they're ready to go down the path. then we built the Emancipation Nation Network, which anybody can actually just Google that and become a member for free. And in there are free webinars, and there are access to over 880 other advocates that you can ask questions about. There are information about grants and jobs and latest research and all kinds of things that change daily, because we upload information all the time, because we understand that if you equip people with the information, then they will find creative ways to use that information in their community that's culturally sensitive to their community. Again, if you put the seed in the mind and you put the seed in the heart, then people will go and open those doors. And if those doors are closed, people will kick in those doors to get those doors open. So it's like the whisper is sometimes more powerful than the march. So
wow, that is a beautiful statement right there. And it's just like, it's very much like, you know, these 4 women just coming together, having a tea, having this conversation,
yes,
and going out now and creating this movement. And I love that. Sometimes it is the whisper. Sometimes it's that one word or that one conversation that lights that fox's tail, and it just lights things on fire.
Yeah, every time I talk to an advocate, it's like they say, "Oh, I started because I heard a story."
Yeah.
And it's like, story. I watched a documentary. I heard a survivor speak. I read a book, and it's like it turned on something, and it can't be turned off. It's like they are on fire with what they want to do. And, you know, we were talking a little bit before this session, and I always think, you know, what you're doing is you're freeing other people, right? You are doing the work to free other people. But what you don't realize sometimes is that you also need to free yourself. Like you're othering inadvertently. You're like, oh, I have to go free these other people who are enslaved. And what you need to do is you need to expand your definition of slavery, because if you look inside yourself, you will find places where you're confined, places where you can't be total 100% your whole self. And that is also in the movement for freedom for women. You know, if you like the way you dress, keep dressing that way. If you're dressing that way because you're trying to fit into some fake ideal of what you think you're supposed to be, then you are enslaved. So there's a great saying. It was supposed to be by Sojourner Truth, but we found out that it's really by Robin Morgan. But that says, you know, I freed 1,000 slaves. I would have freed 1,001 if only they knew they were slaves. It's like you need to look inside yourself and quit trying to be this caricature of a woman and be your 100% whole self. Because if you do that, then you give another woman permission to do that, and another woman permission to do that. And you have changed the world in just the ripple effects. I mean, be your whole sexy self, be your whole intellectual self, be your whole everything, so that you give your daughters, your cousins, your friends permission to also be their whole self. So while you're working to free somebody else, also work to free yourself.
Well said. Emily, do you have any thoughts? I see you just like really.
I would just be learning a lot today, because Celia is just a wealth of knowledge. I'm just so great to have her with us today.
Yeah, I'm just happy to have this platform hosted by women because I think like that's awesome too. But I think also just, you know, I mean, En Vogue said it in the 90s, right? Free your mind and the rest will follow. I mean, it's really no truer words were spoken. And you need to assess yourself and look around where you are feeling confined, where you are dimming your light to make other people feel comfortable. And
Right.
don't dim your light. Be it shine as bright as you can with all your intellect, with all your sexiness, with all your emotion. Bring it all to the table, because you know what? If those other people can't keep up, that has nothing to do with you. Go find people whose light is as bright as yours. The other thing I would say about women is sometimes we have difficulty being a queen among queens. Like we will try to hang out with people less queen-like so we can be the queen. But what we need to learn is being a queen among queens is a skill. It's not, get out of your mind this competition and who she thinks she is, and be appreciative that you get to be among another queen and love her light and have your own light and help other sisters pick up their crown. The one thing that bothers me the most is when I see a woman who put her crown on the ground, meaning, just diminishing herself, just melting into the woodwork because she's shy, or because, she's been told her whole life that, her voice doesn't matter. And that's the thing I think that bothers me. I see it in my classes when I teach classes, and, it's just, I pick that crown up and put it on your head. That's the first thing. So, okay. So that's the internal stuff that you need to do, the internal work that you need to do. But when we start looking at helping other women, there's a great report that just came out not too long ago called, I think it's like Sex Abuse Pipeline to Prison for Girls. And it's like girls' trajectory, which we've probably never hardly heard of this report, but we hear about boys' pipeline to prison all the time. But girls, they run away, they use drugs and those things. That's how it starts. But they're responding to things, terrible things often going on in their home, and they run away. And then the system starts to criminalize them for a very rational response to abuse. And it starts them in this pipeline. They are sometimes meeting traffickers. Kids who run away are 2.5 times more likely to become drug addicted. Runaway is the number one risk factor for domestic minor sex trafficking. We don't have a real response to runaway in the US. We wait for you to run back. That's how genius we are. And it gets these girls, I would say majority, but there's boys as well, but they meet recruiters, they meet traffickers during this time when they're trying to keep themselves safe, because we as adults are failing to keep them safe. And indeed, we're criminalizing them as well. So we have a lot of work to do as anti-trafficking advocates and those types of things. But that is the work. We need to start looking at policies that have forgotten us, policies that don't focus on runaways, that criminalize and stigmatize kids who are involved in the sex trade because they're trying to survive. That's the work we have to do outside ourselves. But we have continual work to do inside and outside. And it's sort of like a 12-step program for life. You have to wake up, you have to say, yes, yesterday I got a barrage of commercials and magazine articles and movies that keep telling me that I am less. So today I'm going to wake up as more.
Amen to that.
Yeah, it's a continual, 12-step program for life, just to step into your own space and be fully you. So I'm sorry I'm going on and on, but
that's amazing, because what you just did and what you said in the last 8 minutes or whatever it was, you really captured the power of the women's rights movement. And I love how, and there's not a whole lot out there in the writings that talk about, the internal struggle, that it starts with you. It starts with you. Like, how can you enter into this and understand the women's rights movement as a woman if you haven't stepped into it within your own self and looking to establish that movement within yourself to free yourself and then being that example and having that sort of overflow now out into the work that you do, which you're such an example of. And I mean, the other topics that when you started talking about the runaways and the lure tactics that people are using now to lure young girls and young women and women into being sexually exploited or labor exploited. Then we think about like pornography, right, and sexual harassment and all of these things that are like sort of perpetuating the issue of gender-based violence, which actually, when you think about that, sexual abuse, physical abuse, you know, things like that were not considered a human rights issue until more recently. I mean, you think about like in the 1990s, there were a whole new host of complex issues that came up with regard to women's and women's rights, like even reproductive rights is something that has been an issue more recently, and the enrollment in military, leadership roles in religious, you know, worship, you know, things like that, employment, you know, women who, you know, other businesses are going to accommodate women's family responsibilities, because oftentimes the woman is the one that is taking on the family responsibilities much more so, you know, than men.
Yeah.
And the reality of the fact that, you know, women are being raped more often. I mean, when you look at some of the numbers, and I have some statistics I want to throw out, you know, 82% of all, you know, juvenile victims are female. You know, 90% of adults, adult rape victims are females. You know, females ages 16 to 19 are 4 times more likely than the general population to be victims of rape, attempted rape, or sexual assault. You know, women ages 18 to 24 in college, our college students typically are 3 times more likely to experience sexual violence. I mean, it's like females, women, a great majority. I mean, we're not talking like 30%, we're talking like 90%, you know, 4 times likely, 3 times likely. I mean, it's when you look at even human trafficking, victims of human trafficking, you know, women and girls, I mean, it's the great majority are the ones who are being exploited in that way. So, you know, and when you think about like pornography, you know, for example, we've talked about this in previous episodes too, Emily, and pipe in, but that's the thing, like, when is it dangerous to women versus freedom of speech or someone having the right to do this? You know, when does, for sexual harassment, you know, when does the line of flirting end and harassment begin? Exactly. Why do we have to have discussions like this?
It's like when our voice is heard, you know, when we say no and it actually is heard, that's when, in my opinion. But I think who is doing all the hurting? You know, largely men. And we're such a compassionate people because we still date them, we still marry them, we still like them. So how compassionate, you know, are we? And instead of saying, you know, why are these women going to jail for murder? Instead of like, we should be saying, why aren't more women going to jail for murder? Really? But, you know, we're such a compassionate people. And so then when you look at things like human trafficking and even street level prostitution, and you have a large majority of male police officers policing women, I mean, that should not be, for the fact that you just stated, for the overwhelming statistical evidence that, particularly in this issue, when we're talking about street level prostitution or human sex trafficking, men should not have absolute discretion at the police stop over women who are absolutely vulnerable with no voice. Because what we found in our studies in street prostitution, like up to 40% of the women that we interviewed had sex with police officers that was not consensual. And so who is this woman to report her abuse to? Her oppressor? So because of the statistics you just mentioned, we should never in any case have a male-dominated system that polices or has power over a largely vulnerable population of women, because that is just seed for corruption. And it's going on and on and on. And there are lots of women's voices right now today that won't be heard when they try to report something like that. They will be stigmatized. And even the customers, you know, are part-time Johns. Like, John is not a term that I use because it is not a it's a neutral term that gets him off the hook. So if a man has sex with a 14 or 15-year-old, he's not a John. He's a child molester. He's a sexual predator. Let's call it what it is. Let's stop protecting this already protected class. And that is a part of what is happening in society everywhere. And then when we speak up, of course there's certain labels that we get called and we get deemed if we speak up too much or if we're too empowered, then they try to bring us down with these terms that they want to call us. But that's fine. Like I will adopt the term because
Sure.
whatever it takes.
Yeah, and you hit on that. I mean, what is it today that's perpetuating these issues? And you hit it right on the dot. Boys being boys kind of attitude, this sort of minimizing the activity of demand, of purchasing sex, our culture, our community, like the biases that we have, the way media, like you were saying, in the magazines and in movies, and how we have this caricature, that we feel like we need to fit into that mold as a woman today. And those are all thought processes, right? Like,
Absolutely.
How do we gain disciplined thought over that, and that moves us into, we have a few minutes left. So I kind of wanted to, and we were sort of leading toward that, what can people do to impact change? Mm-hmm. Now, other than, I know you had said it, really look at the internal struggle. You are the start of the women's rights movement for you and for those around you. And so if you set yourself free from your own sort of, whatever it is, your own bars that you put in front of yourself. But what are some other ways? I know you had dropped policies and protocols as well, which I think is important. And then looking at the authority and how that needs to change. Yeah. What are some things that, like, to our audience right now, like, what are some things that you think, can people can do right now?
I think once you do the internal inventory and you've done that search and there's some things that you decide you're just going to be your full self, you will be so much happier too. It's going to be wonderful. But then start practice. Some people write about the male gaze, you've been kind of subliminally trained to look through men's eyes. So when you're watching your favorite television program or what is happening, take off the male gaze lens, because male gaze wants you to look through men's eyes. Of course, Clint Eastwood is 92 years old and the woman that falls in love with him is 27. Of course but when you take those lenses off, you'll be like, wait, what? Or, like, I remember this movie, Bad Santa. A lot of people have seen it, but Billy Bob Thornton he's an alcoholic, all these things. He goes into a bar. This woman who's the bartender, they start dating because of course she would like a drunk, unemployed alcoholic who urinates on himself. And it's like when you take off those male gaze glasses, the world looks so different. When you start watching Cinderella and all the little Disney shows, you take off those glasses, you'll be like, oh my God, what have I been given permission to? It's like, so do that second. Start just looking at movies and shows and news media as a woman. Don't let them like subliminally let you look through men's eyes. Look at it as a woman and you will be horrified at what you see. Then the third thing is, come out, start joining women's movements, start joining, if you're interested in human trafficking, there are lots of anti-trafficking coalitions across communities. And if there isn't a coalition in your community, develop one. Again, you kicked it off by saying, 3 or 4 women got in the room and said, do you think this is right? No, I don't. Okay, that is a meeting. Then you bring other women to the next meeting. You know what? You got a group. And then you say, who's not at the table that should be at the table? And you go out and you charge women with going and getting those people and bringing them to the table. Now you went from a meeting to a group to a movement. You don't need to know it all. You need to know one thing. You bring the bright people to the table and allow them to create. And they will create. If you move your ego and not try to own it and control it, they will bring you a beautiful tapestry of things that are possible. but you can't lead unless you're a person leading with integrity. That means that you have to do your internal work, because people will see through you if you don't. And then you have to take off those male gaze glasses and you have to see the world for what it is. And it is not some threatening feminist political thing you're trying to do. This is about humanity. It's just about equity and humanity. You are doing nothing that should be threatening. It should be something that should be welcomed. But first, you have to get woke and you have to see it. And you can't see it until you do your internal work and you take off your glasses that they keep trying to force on your face. And you just see the world for what it is. And that will give you the passion and the power to go after the thing that you want on behalf of yourself, but on behalf of all the little girls you see coming up. Make the world a place that they want to live in and they can thrive in.
That is absolutely beautiful. I love it. And I think that you said it. I mean, 1, 2, 3, I think that, and it always starts with us. It always starts with us. And the impact that every one of us really has is powerful. And, and I just also wanted to highlight that we're coming close to it, but March 8th is International Women's Day. And so what great time, what great timing to take some time aside to think about that and to really look at how much more you can do when you break free.
That's right.
Emily, do you have any final thoughts?
Yes and no. I mean, I don't want to get us started on any other tangents unless we had a few more minutes. I guess
I think we have a few more minutes, right?
I just love the fact and the idea of different nationalities of women coming together and having these conversations and having issues. I mean, the same issues that they can band together and work together to find solutions for. So, and we've seen that throughout history, and I hope that we will continue to see it more. I'm just so grateful that we have us three here that are just unique and diverse in our own ways. So I guess if there's any like specific issues today that different ethnicities can band together to work through. I know we also talked about just like sex work in general, the decriminalization or legalization of that. Is that really a step in the right direction, a step forward, or is that just pushing us back in time if we're decriminalizing sex work? So I don't know if either of you want to talk about any of those things, but those were the only last things on my mind.
I mean, I think it's beautiful. It is a beautiful tapestry of women all over the world, all of them beautiful and unique in their own right. And so I love when diverse women come together. And I think diversity, when you talk about diversity of thought as well. I think we're not so keen on that just anywhere in the world. We just haven't gotten to that yet. But diversity of thought, meaning being in the room with women who think very differently than you do. And so with the human trafficking issue, sex trafficking in particular, they're abolitionists that absolutely do not support sex work in any form or fashion. They believe it's derogatory to women. It's dominated under male patriarchy. And then you'll see other women feminists that fight for the rights for women to be sex workers, to sell their services in the sexual market. And so those women have very different and opposing views. And I think that you can exist under the same roof when you find common ground, because if we continue to fight each other, we all stay down and then they win. But if we can find common ground, we can find power within our collective movements. For instance, all groups are against human trafficking, the force, fraud, and coercion of the sex trade. All groups are against people under 18 who are children being involved. All groups, that's common ground that we can move forward on. We might disagree in terms of, is sex work a job or is sex work exploitation? But there's common ground that we can agree and we can move forward on. And that's that's actually the beauty of diversity, to have different voices. We don't need to have a uniform voice on everything. So, yeah.
Well said. So well said. Excuse me. Yeah, I'm just so grateful that we had the opportunity to come together and do this. Dr. Williamson, thank you so much. You guys, make sure you look up Emancipation Nation and join the network. And be sure to keep your eyes open for your next podcast. When is your next podcast coming up soon?
It comes out every Tuesday. So,
okay.
Yeah, that's when it drops. So tune into that and we'll learn more and go forward. I'm learning too from all these experts around the world. It's really awesome. So I get to do this platform and learn myself. So, and thank you so much, Hannah and Emily. It's been such a pleasure. You guys are two powerful women and doing your thing too, getting your voice out there. I'm just so happy to see it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, ladies, and thank you, everyone, for attending today's Cup of Hope panel. We appreciate your time, and we hope you found it valuable. If you are interested in more, please check out the links that we posted in the chat to the Emancipation Network, Nation Network that is in the chat. And, of course, be sure to look up Dr. Celia Williamson's podcast and learn more. On behalf of Hope Against Trafficking and the Michigan Abolitionist Project, thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great rest